3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps Book 3. One Step for 1,000 Kalpas. Chapter 19. By Tangqi. DG is a demon. There are 2 types of demons in Bahuang. The monster tribe is one of the 4 tribes of the 8 desolations. Apart from being weaker than the god tribe, demon tribe, and ghost tribe, and unable to stand on their own, and having to vassal the demon tribe to establish themselves, they have no other problems, so they are not inferior to others. For example, if Qing Jiang is getting married, Ingruahui, the prince of the demon clan, is also eligible to come to the banquet and sit at the same table as Xia Guzhu, the lord of the black underworld. But the problem of monsters is huge. If the creatures of the 4 races are corrupted, they will become monsters. In addition, the creatures born from evil and doing evil are also monsters. For example, the demons suppressed in the 27 Heavens demon-locking tower are all monsters. Monsters are not weak, and they are naturally rebellious and love to do evil, so they are not tolerated by the 4 tribes. Everyone agrees that monsters are inferior and depraved. Even Qing Jiang, who is also rebellious, doesn't like monsters. If any big monster dares to come to his wedding banquet, he will beat him out. Fortunately, DG is not a monster. She is weak, beautiful, and a monster. Tianbu looked at DG, who was kneeling in front of her, and held up the gold leaf card in her hand. His eyes passed over her slightly trembling shoulders and fell on her frightened face. He thought to himself, no wonder Yanlan was wrong. I think she is the beauty newly welcomed into UNG Palace by His Highness Third Prince. This DG is indeed very good-looking. However, DG has nothing to do with His Highness the Third Highness. She was picked up by God Zuti. They met DG on their way back to Jichangshan from Chaoyang Valley. At that time, she was being bullied by several demons, and God Zuti rescued her. According to what DG said, she was originally a little demon in an unknown mountain in the southern wilderness. She lost her parents not long after she was born and was raised by a kind-hearted mother-in-law from the same mountain. Later, my mother-in-law became ill. In order to treat her mother-in-law's illness, she sold herself to a demon noble and became a lucky girl in his backyard. It was also at that time that she got the name DG. She lived a peaceful life in the demon clan's backyard for a while, but then the man got married and the backyard had a mistress. She grew up day by day and had a pretty decent face. The mistress didn't like her, and she was beaten and scolded all the time. She couldn't bear it anymore and ran away. But my mother-in-law is gone. She is a little demon who can only play the flute. How can she have a good life wandering in this wasteland? She can only live with food and hunger. She was beaten this time because she was so hungry that she stole a few wild fruits in front of the demon caves. This was indeed an extremely miserable life experience. Zuti was so weak that she allowed her to follow him and brought her all the way back to UNG Palace. In fact, Tianbu was a little worried at first. Because God Zuti rescued DG and brought her back to UNG Palace, it was very similar to the time when Master Bai Qian rescued Xiaoba Snake Xiaoxin and brought her back to Qingqiu Fox Cave. Xiao Xian and Tianbu have met before. In terms of looks, DG and her can be said to be from the same family. They both look weak and pitiful to me. But later, the weak little snake that I felt pity for took away Sangji, the fiancé of Bai Qian, and Qingqiu and Jichangshan almost turned against each other. Therefore, Tianbu was always on guard that DG would create some trouble between His Highness the Third Highness and God Zuti. But DG seems to be really different from Xiaoxin. At least from Tianbu's observation in the past few days, he feels that she is very honest. For example, when Yanlan gave her the invitation to the 1,000 Flowers ceremony, which was hard to find, her first reaction was to be frightened, and she knelt down in front of her tremblingly, wanting to hand the invitation to her and ask her to pass it on to her lord. The lord she calls is the god Zuti. It is a secret for God Zuti to visit Jichangshan and move into UNG Palace. Only Tianbu and Xiangjia, the immortal servants of UNG Palace, know her true identity. Of course, DG didn't know who she was, but she only knew that she was noble, so she used the title she used to call her old master, respectfully calling her lord. Under the eaves of the back garden of Yuanji Palace, DG had been kneeling for a while. Seeing that Tianbu did not accept the invitation card in her hand, she became more and more worried and explained uneasily, "My lord wants to listen to first symbols." The slave is not very familiar with the song, so she has been practicing under the wishful tree next to the rose garden this morning. The slave was quite involved in the practice, so after finishing the song, she discovered that the fairy was near the slave. The maid next to the fairy called her flower master. I know that the flower master of Jichangshan is of high status, so when she asked me about it, I didn't dare not answer. She gave me this message, and I didn't dare not answer it. Tianbu then took the post from DG's hand, opened it and glanced at it, seemingly casually. "Oh, what did Fairy Yanlan ask you?" Tianbu's voice was very gentle, but DG didn't dare to relax. She tensed her body and replied in panic. "The flower master fairy asked me if I had just entered Yuanji Palace recently, and I answered yes. She asked me again if I was the slave. Where she met His Highness the Third Prince, the slave girl told her that she was at the border of the southern wilderness. She didn't ask the slave girl any more questions. She only gave the slave girl this post, saying that she had recently gone to heaven and had no place to relieve her boredom. She would be in the 9th heaven in 2 days. There is a 1,000-flower ceremony that takes place every 60 years. Let me take this post and go to the ceremony to relax and relieve your boredom." She licked her lips and added hesitantly, "Flower Master Fairy, she seems to be a very kind fairy." Tianbu knew that DG had not lied to her, because she was behind a nearby rockery when they were talking this morning. She knew what they said, but she still asked DG to repeat it, but she was still selfishly testing whether DG was honest. DG had a good impression of Yanlan and praised Yanlan for her kindness. When Yanlan was talking to DG this morning, DG kept her head lowered and didn't see Yanlan's expression. It's not surprising that she would have this misconception. But at that time, Tianbu, who was a few steps away, could see it clearly. When DG replied that Yanlan met His Highness the Third Highness in the southern wilderness, Yanlan's face darkened. Later, Yanlan took out the invitation card from his sleeve. At this time, he even sneered for a moment, his eyes covered with a layer of malice. Tianbu saw Yanlan's expression at that time, so he understood that the invitation card she gave had bad intentions. This year's 1,000-flower ceremony, Yuanji Palace did not help, and Yanlan took care of everything. As the flower master, she should be very busy, but she can still find time to pay attention to whether there are new beauties in Yuanji Palace, and she can also free up her hands to hinder new beauties, which shows that she is really dedicated to His Highness the Third Highness. And now Yuanji Palace still lives with Gugu and his entourage, and there are indeed many secrets. Tianbu is not afraid of Yanlan finding out anything. After all, her moral skills are not enough. But it would be nice to have DG to hold Yanlan back and divert her attention. DG, who was kneeling down, swallowed hard and continued to murmur, "Slave, slave, I was born in the southern wilderness. I became DG and was raised in the back house. I have never seen much of the world. The flower master fairy, she is beautiful and kind-hearted, but I don't know if such a grand ceremony is for people of my status. I don't know what to do with this invitation, so..." Tianbu stopped DG Nianyuo's words and returned the card in his hand to her. There is no need to inform the lord about such a small matter. She took advantage of the situation and smiled at her. "The 1,000-flower ceremony is indeed it's worth seeing. I'll arrange for 2 immortal attendants to follow you in 2 days, so it doesn't hurt that you go to the festival for a walk." Pumingzian Garden, the royal garden of the Tian clan, is located on the 6th day. Its name comes from Pumingzian Mountain, the place where the heavenly kings of past dynasties practiced cultivation. As one of the largest celebrations in Jizangshan, the 1,000-flower ceremony has always been held in the Pumingxia Rock Garden. Because this forest garden is really big enough to accommodate hundreds of thousands of gods and Buddhas at the same time without any problem. Yanlan led a long list of flower fairies to conduct a final inspection of the entire forest garden before the ceremony began, and then retreated from all the fairies, leaving only her personal maid Yuan'er by her side. Seeing that all the flower fairies had gone away, Yuan'er took a step forward and lowered her voice. "Flower Master, the fairies who came to attend the Thousand Flowers ceremony have arrived in the 9 heavens one after another in the past few days. There are also quite a few goddesses who have been with His Highness. Rumors have spread among them that DG is a newcomer to His Highness and will also attend this grand ceremony. Many goddesses are very unhappy." Yanlan's eyebrows moved slightly, but she said nothing. Yuan'er lowered her voice. "In the past, the women who could enter the UNG palace and accompany the Third Highness all had noble status, beautiful appearance, and were all from the divine race. That DG was just a lowly demon race, being able to enter UNG palace. How can those goddesses swallow this breath, especially the 2 goddesses Bian Chanshan and Dangxinshan, who've already said that they will make DG look good, presumably." Yanlan suddenly interrupted her. "They did this to me in the past." Ranner was agitated and suddenly remembered that 30,000 years ago, when Yanlan first ascended to heaven, she was looked down upon by the goddesses and made things difficult for her at every turn. But Ranner didn't understand. It was clearly Yanlan's intention to teach DG a lesson, and it was her personal order, why she said such words at this time. Yanner couldn't figure out what Yanlan meant, and was frightened for a moment, so she fell to her knees. "Master Hua, this slave didn't mean." Yanlan raised his hand to stop her, and after a while, asked her, "Do you remember? So what does DG look like?" Yenner didn't know how to answer without making a mistake. She hesitated for a moment and said, "I was born. I was born to be a little weak." Yanlan smiled, and the smile looked very cold, hanging on the cold corners of her mouth, which looked very mean. Yes, it was trembling, with a pitiful look, as if she would cry if she said the slightest harsh words. "But it's so beautiful." She turned her head and looked at Ranner. "When I was talking to her, do you know what I was thinking? I was wondering how she could use such an expression to beg for mercy from His Highness, make His Highness feel soft, and then be taken back by His Highness. From UNG Palace. Thinking of this, I just..." She didn't finish her words. Her nails dug into her palms, and the jealousy in her eyes was real. Ranner finally understood Yanlan's attitude, and she immediately understood what she should say. That DG does have a charming and weak face, but in terms of beauty, it is not as beautiful as the Flower Master. Besides, Flower Master, you have such a distinguished status now. Why do you have to? Yanlan didn't quite agree with her words of comfort. Even if Tangqi is reincarnated, he is a mortal who has become an immortal. What kind of noble status does he have? After a while, she laughed at herself and murmured softly, "Should I wonder, isn't this very rude to that DG?" At this point, her eyes turned red suddenly, but, with the same low status, why can she be protected in UNG Palace without suffering at all? At that time I had to be bullied by those goddesses and fairies like that? It's not fair, isn't it? Yuan'er worriedly said, "Flower Master." Yanlan ignored her and immersed herself in her own world. She only said, "I did this just to seek fairness." It also helped her realize that this 9 heavens is not a good place. This is a meritorious deed. As if to convince herself, she repeated, "This is a meritorious deed." Then, without looking at Yuan'er, he walked towards the exit of the Imperial Garden. On the first day of the Thousand Flowers ceremony, on the 6th day, there was a faint sound of fairy sounds, and wonderful flowers were raining from the sky. Fairies and gods were bustling in the Pumingxia rock garden. Everyone was in groups of 3 or 5, enjoying the flowers and chatting at the same time. Because there are not many gods who really have the taste to understand these exotic flowers and plants, so everyone is mainly chatting. Ing Qianxia just came to see the flowers. Ing is the surname of the king of the demon clan. So Ing Qianxia is a demon, and a demon among the royal clan of the demon clan. However, Ing Qianxia is not a serious royal demon. She was not born with the surname Ing. Her father is the adopted brother of the current demon lord, who once saved the demon lord's life. Ing was the surname given to their family by the demon lord when Ing Qianxia turned 10,000 years old. Ing Qianxia looked at the pavilion next door for a while, and her chess friend Princess Jihe raised her hand and knocked on the chess table in front of her. Ing Qianxia was not disturbed and did not look back. Jihe glanced at the pavilion next door, raised his eyebrows and asked Ing Qianxia, "What, you want to help her? When did you become so kind? Is it because we are both demons and can't stand it?" "Not really." She and Jihe strolled around the garden and came to the area near Jiaoqing Lake. They happened to be tired. Seeing that the place was quiet and there was no one in the two pavilions facing each other in the lake, they occupied one of the pavilions to play chess. Halfway through the chess game, someone came from the booth next door. Several goddesses, a group of maids, the maids gathered around. In other words, they held a beautiful banshee hostage. The two pavilions were only about 10 steps apart, and Ing Qianxia was not deaf. From the ridicule of the female fairies towards the little banshee, she roughly understood the whole story. It turns out that the little succubus is the new favorite of His Highness Lian San of Yunji Palace, and most of the goddesses who ridiculed her have been around that highness before. They couldn't understand that a little demon could enter the Yunji Palace, so they came here on purpose. Her trouble. His Royal Highness Lian of Yunji Palace has a romantic reputation throughout the world, and Ing Qianxia has heard about it for a long time. When he was a young man, His Highness sat on a cloud throne in front of the Shiliang River and received a letter from the demons. Ing Qianxia also has a painting. Copies are won by competing with others. Ing Qianxia remembered that welcoming beauties in Yunji Palace in the past was like welcoming water from all directions in the South China Sea near her home, without rest at all times. However, in the past few thousand years, it seems that no beauty has appeared next to His Highness. Even Ing Qianxia and her sworn brother, the prince of the demon tribe, Ing Ruohui, mentioned this matter, saying that maybe His Highness the third prince of the 8 wildernesses had seen everything and had nothing to learn, so he had lost interest in the game Huakeng. As far as Ing Qianxia knew, many people were secretly speculating that if Yunji Palace welcomes beauties again, how stunning the beauties they would welcome would be. Ing Qianxia is also curious. To be honest, she never thought that the beauty whom Yunji Palace would open its doors to welcome again would be a monster. Because in the past, there had never been a demon clan around the third highness. Ing Qianxia could probably understand the hostility and resentment of the goddesses who admired His Highness Lian San towards the little banshee. In fact, when they first arrived at the pavilion, the goddesses were not overly aggressive towards the little succubus. They were just trying to talk the right words. Later, when they saw that she did not speak or resist, they gradually became overly aggressive and asked the little witch to serve them tea and play music for their entertainment. The little demon is weak-tempered and not very smart. She seems to have no idea that these goddesses are insulting Yunji Palace by insulting her, nor does she think that she needs to maintain the dignity of Yunji Palace. She did whatever they asked her to do. She just lowered her head and trembled. She was beautiful, a rare beauty, but her groveling appearance made people look down on her. Unexpectedly, the more she acted like this, the angrier the goddesses became. On the pretext that the pavilion was crowded and stuffy, they actually asked her to stand on a lotus branch outside the pavilion and play the flute for them. They tied up the mana around the little demon. Without it, the little demon was naturally unable to stand on the lotus branch. It had a pair of tearful eyes and was waiting to beg, but was pushed by the maid in orange next to it and fell into the pool with a plop. Middle. The little demon was frightened and couldn't stop flopping in the pool. The goddesses in the pavilion were amused by her embarrassment, and they all covered their mouths and laughed. Jia asked Ing Qianxia if she wanted to help the little succubus, and asked her when she was so kind, and whether it was because she was a member of the demon clan and couldn't stand it, or because Jihe had caught a glimpse of the scene. Ing Qianxia didn't think she was a kind person, and she had no intention of getting involved in this matter. Her eyes stayed at the pavilion over there for a little longer, mainly because she remembered that she went to Taichung Palace this morning. While waiting for Jihe, I overheard a chat between Immortal Suji and Immortal Chonglin. At that time, Immortal Suji asked Immortal Chonglin somewhat mysteriously, didn't you see the meeting that day? He approached immortal Chonglin and lowered his voice and said, I don't think His Highness is going to be sincere this time. Although he didn't finish his words, he smiled and said, but let me say something disrespectful. They look like they are indeed a good match. Immortal Lord Chonglin was silent for a moment. You are a monk, but you are very keen in this area. Su Ji smiled sarcastically. Then they saw her, and they were both stunned and stopped. In fact, Su Ji didn't speak very loudly. When he spoke later, he deliberately suppressed his voice, and his voice became even lower. If Ying Qianxia hadn't always had a sharp ear, she shouldn't have been able to hear what they said. So she just acted as if she didn't hear anything, bowed slightly, greeted them, and stood aside. The two immortal lords also nodded as a return to her gift, then looked away, said a few words, and left. Ying Qianxia has always been curious about what the beauty would be like if Yuanji Palace welcomed a beauty again. After hearing what Su Ji said this time, they learned that His Highness Lian San actually fell in love with the newcomer, and that the new guy seemed to Su Ji and Chonglin to be very suitable for His Highness Lian San. They were surprised and even more curious. Therefore, when those goddesses brought the little demon into the next pavilion and heard them say that the little demon was the newcomer next to His Highness Lian San, she immediately stopped playing chess and turned her head. Jiha raised his hand and waved it in front of her eyes. Mengilu, why don't you reply to me? Do you really want to save that little demon? Only then did Ying Qianxia take her eyes back from the struggling little banshee in the pool. Just look at the excitement. However, Jiha followed her retracted gaze and looked towards the pool. Tut tu tang. The appearance of this little banshee struggling in embarrassment has a different flavor, and it is even more beautiful. Although this princess is a female fairy, seeing her look like this is very pity. He added, it takes a lot of skills to be able to charm Lian Songjun, a god who always walks among flowers. At least she has mastered the word pity to the extreme, which is very powerful. However, Ying Qianxia no longer paid attention to the turmoil in the pavilion next door. She picked up the white piece and made a move. She only said, His Royal Highness Lian San has been single for thousands of years. It is a bit surprising that the new one he has fallen in love with is such a weak woman. Although he didn't say it clearly, there was a hint of disapproval in his voice. He paused and smiled meaninglessly. Perhaps there are indeed many differences in aesthetics between men and women. Such a weak woman like a daughter flower, they actually thought the two of them were compatible. Jiha also followed by Z and took a step forward, saying, that little banshee is indeed irritating, but I think Lian Song is probably just a newbie for a while, so what's the point of being compatible? Ying Qianxia was quiet for a moment and said calmly, indeed, if it is true that he has been playing the game for tens of thousands of years, but in the end he truly fell in love with a woman who like a daughter flower relies on the protection of others to survive. It would be disappointing. Jiha said with a smile, what are you so disappointed about? After saying this, she was stunned for a moment when she thought about it and looked up at Ying Qianxia. Are you also treating him? Ying Qianxia calmly finished her chess move and gave her a cold look. Play your chess. What nonsense are you talking about? Jiha originally wanted to say something, but then he thought that Ying Qianxia had always been cold-hearted and was only interested in learning the art of calming the nerves and calming the spirits. It shouldn't be too hard to think about it. He also wanted to conquer the prodigal son Lian Song, so he stopped talking. Words. At this moment, a mysterious shadow suddenly passed before their eyes. The two of them looked up, only to see the mysterious figure half entering the pool. Like a big bird, it grabbed the little banshee that had started to choke on the water and quickly flew back to a big rock in the pool. Looking carefully, the mysterious figure is actually an immortal lord in mysterious clothes. The immortal lord half-hugged the little succubus, who was already very weak, and looked at the goddesses in the pavilion. He frowned and reproached. Bullying the weak by force is not what a gentleman should do, let alone what all the noble goddesses should do. Thing. Jiha picked up a black piece and his eyes were attracted by the Xuani immortal lord. Hearing that he was blaming those goddesses of noble birth, his expression became playful. He simply threw the chess piece back into the chess jar and asked Ding Qianxia. Road. Why are you playing chess? He said with interest as he propped up his chin and looked at the next door. It would be a shame if we didn't go to see a good show. We have such a good seat. I can't say whether the play was good or not, but it was a surprise to the nymphs and fairies in the pavilion. A red-clothed fairy was the first to react, looked at the xian-clothed immortal lord, and sneered. Who do I think I am? It turns out to be immortal Lord Yuang, who is just a mortal who became an immortal, but he came to help this little demon, and don't even ask yourself if you have the qualifications and abilities. Saying this, a red ribbon suddenly shook out and struck straight at the Xuani immortal lord. The immortal king named Yuang hugged the little banshee in his arms and quickly escaped. The red silk hit the big stone, and the big stone split into 9 petals, disturbing the water in the pool and splashing white waves. The Yuang immortal lord and the little banshee stood on another ornamental stone. Yuang let go of the little banshee, who was stunned by this sudden change, and grabbed her right hand in the air. A long sword appeared in her hand, and the sword and man merged into one, and they quickly attacked the red-clothed fairy. Yuang moved so fast that no one in the pavilion could react at all. Just as a murder was about to happen, a green figure suddenly appeared in the air. Bang! The sound of weapons clashing was heard, and sparks flew up in the air. Yuang's urgent attack was blocked, and he spun around and flew back to the ornamental stone. The bamboo green figure also floated down and stayed on a lotus branch nearby. The purple stone twill knife was placed across the chest, and the voice was curious. What are you doing? But it was Xuang He. Through the blow just now, Yuang already understood the strength of the opponent and knew that he was no match for him, so he said with an ugly face, "Does this immortal lord want to help the tyrants do evil?" Xuang He glanced at the drowned DG behind Yuang, and then at the fairies in the pavilion, who were very quiet due to this incident. With his wisdom, he couldn't tell what happened, and he was very confused. DG seemed to have finally calmed down and took a trembling step forward. With tears in her eyes, she timidly called him Master Shinjun. Xuang He dried her clothes with a snap of her fingers, frowned and said, "DG, tell me what's going on?" But before DG could speak, a crisp bird-like voice suddenly sounded in the air, accompanied by a sneer. "Xiao Xuang, you are too stupid. What else do you need to ask? It is not obvious that it is these Xiani goddesses who are bullying our family. DG, have you been rescued by this immortal lord? You were good, but you got into a fight with this immortal lord, confused. As the word confused spread in the air, a beautiful black robe appeared. The female fairy fluttered her black gauze sleeves and landed steadily on another lotus branch. This gorgeous woman is none other than Lord Zongrong, who has just recovered from her illness thanks to Zhu Tiai's blood. When DG saw Bo Rong, she obviously relaxed a little. She was not as timid as when she saw Xuang He. She took a big step in her direction and said in a trembling voice, "Fairy." Seeing that she was about to fall into the lake again due to excitement, Zongrong raised her hand and hit a beam of light, then supported DG. In the pavilion, the red-clothed fairy who had just attacked immortal Lord Yuang couldn't hold back her anger. She was angry and rushed towards Xuanghe and Zongrong. "Who are you? Do you know who we are? I advise you to take care of yourself. Nosy business." Zongrong looked at the red-clothed fairy, raised her eyebrows, and sneered, "I don't care who you are. You bullied my DG, and you dare to accuse me of being nosy." Standing at the innermost side of the pavilion, hidden behind a large number of maids, Yanlan suddenly raised her eyes and looked directly at Bo Rong. There is no doubt that DG is a new beauty in Yuanji Palace, but this new and strange fairy says that DG belongs to her family. What's going on? Could it be that she is also from Yuanji Palace? But why have I never seen her? Yanlan's eyes were bright and clear, and when he was about to take a closer look at the fairy, he saw her suddenly turning her face to the side and looking at the path by the lake. The originally sarcastic profile suddenly softened for some reason, and the crisp but cold voice was also covered with a layer of honey. He said coquettishly towards the direction of the path, "My lord, you are finally here. You see, They don't talk too much. It makes sense. Yanlong followed the gaze of the black-robed fairy and saw a white-robed fairy coming from the flowers and willows and standing by the lake at the exit of the trail. The young man was born as gentle as jade and said with a smile, "It's strange. This is the 9th level of the country of etiquette. Can you meet someone more unreasonable than you?" Yanlong originally thought that this was the master mentioned by the black-robed fairy, but saw the fairy give the white-robed fairy a blank look, spin up, fly across the green lake, and arrive at the lakeside. After she landed, a female fairy in yellow emerged from the worry-free forest behind the white-clothed fairy. The black-robed fairy took 2 steps forward, grabbed the sleeve of the female fairy. Her voice became very delicate and shook the sleeve of the female fairy as if complaining, "My lord, look at them. They actually bully our DG like this." DG in the pool also knelt on the viewing stone in the distance, worshipped solemnly, and said, "Your Majesty." Yanlong's pupils suddenly shrank. When the goddesses in the pavilion heard that the black-robed female immortal and DG were calling their lord to the yellow-robed female immortal who was walking slowly from the flowers and willows, their expressions became frightened and uncertain, and they all looked at the female immortal. This made Yanlong's gaze less abrupt. Yanlong calmly hid behind everyone and looked at the woman in yellow who is called the Lord. The woman is slender and tall. She is wearing a plain pale yellow dress. She is not tied up in a bun and only has a simple golden flower crown pressed on her black hair. The eyebrows are slender and black, and there are tiny golden light beads pasted on the brow bone of the right eyebrow. It is a very strange makeup, but it perfectly complements the apricot-like eyes under the eyebrows. Just from these eyes, it can be concluded that the woman is a beauty. She said it was pushed out because the lower half of her face was covered by white gauze. This makes her appear mysterious. Yanlong quickly went through it in her mind, but she had no clue who this female fairy might be. The goddesses looked at the woman, and the woman looked at them, but her eyes were just like a flock of geese casually passing by the horizon, leaving no mark on them. The woman casually scanned the entire Jyala Lake, then made a white jade chair for herself. She sat down as if she was a little tired, put one hand on the armrest, and tapped lightly, frowning slightly, but her voice there was no sense of oppression. It was very refreshing, and he seemed to be very kind. He asked, "What's going on?" The entire Jyala Lake was silent. Yanlong was slightly distracted and looked at the goddesses in the pavilion and saw the great goddess Bien Chuncheon sitting next to the stone table with her eyebrows furrowed. This great goddess is the leader of all the goddesses in the pavilion. The goddesses looked nervous and looked at her. The red-clothed fairy, who was the first to attack Immortal Yuing just now, is the sister of the great goddess, the little goddess from Bianchun Mountain. She is standing next to the great goddess at this time. The little goddess in red clothes was always impulsive and used to being lawless. Seeing that everyone was silent, she frowned and wanted to step forward to answer. When she made a move, the big goddess grabbed her hand. Yanlong saw clearly that even the scheming goddess was wary of the woman in yellow. She knew that today's matter would not end well, and she was afraid of being implicated, so she originally stood very far away, but now she quietly moved back. In the shocking silence, it was the fairy lord in white next to the woman in yellow who spoke. "It's strange, since Fairy Yanlong, who is in charge of this 1,000-flower ceremony, is here. Why is it that my DG was bullied and fell into the water?" Yanlong was startled and couldn't care less about why the white-clothed immortal lord, whom she had never met before, recognized her. Seeing everyone looking at her, she struggled to smile. The goddesses. "I just heard that the Third Highness has just entered the palace." DG played the flute very well and admired her very much, so she asked her to play 2 songs. As for why DG fell into the water, I didn't pay much attention at the time. It seemed that DG was standing by the pavilion. There were many people in the pavilion, maybe who pushed it accidentally, or maybe it was DG who didn't notice it for a moment and fell into the pool accidentally. Yanlong Taichi was good at it. When the little goddess from Bien Chuncheon heard this explanation, she immediately broke away from the big goddess's hand, stood up and echoed, "That's it, it must be because she didn't stand firm." DG moved her lips, wanting to say something. She always felt that someone pushed her on purpose, but in the confusion at the time, she didn't see clearly who pushed her. When Yanlan said this, she was not sure whether the person pushed her intentionally or accidentally squeezed her. But combined with the difficulties she suffered before falling into the water, it seems more likely that a fairy pushed her deliberately. So she worked hard to muster up the courage and timidly argued, But I think there was someone before she fell into the water." But the little goddess Bien Chun in red didn't let her finish her words at all, and interrupted her hurriedly. "What do you think? Do you want to accuse us of pushing you unjustly? Then tell us we are not unjust." "Wu Qiu, why did I push you on purpose?" The little goddess Bien Chun said this just to deceive DG into being honest. And the honest DG really didn't know why they bullied her, so she was speechless. When the little goddess saw this, she snorted arrogantly. DG's face turned snow-white, and she took a step back in embarrassment. However, Immortal Yuing on the side couldn't stand it. She sneered and said sarcastically, "Several of you fairies were once the three of Yuanji Palace. It doesn't seem difficult to understand why His Highness's confidant is embarrassing DG." The expressions of the goddesses in the pavilion suddenly changed. Before the goddesses could argue, Bo-rong sighed in surprise. "I see. So you think our DG is the third prince's new favorite?" Her dark eyes rolled, as if she was amused. "This DG is obviously the little Luji picked up by my master. She is so timid and has never seen much of the world. How can she bear the kindness of your Highness Liansan? Compared to her, am I not more like your Highness Liansan? Are you welcoming the beauty into Yuanji Palace?" She kept saying, "Your Highness Liansan." The sarcastic meaning of these words should not be too obvious, but her tone seemed to be quite sincere, making it difficult to tell whether what she said was true or just sarcastic. But Bien Chun's little goddess was fooled by her and said in disbelief, "You said you are the one." Bo-rong glanced at her teasingly. "Yes, it's me. How are you doing?" She felt it was particularly interesting, and laughed to herself. "I worked hard for a long time, but I bullied the wrong person. Don't you think you are quite ridiculous? Well, since you caused DG to fall into the water, then you also go into the water for a walk and we can be even. How about it?" The little goddess was completely irritated by Bo-rong's attitude. The veins on her forehead were beating wildly, and she gritted her teeth and said, "Don't even think about it." The great goddess Bien Chun, who had been silent all this time, spoke up at this time. The fairy misunderstood. "It was indeed an accident that DG fell into the water, but it is true that we did not take good care of DG. I will take my place." Maybe even the great goddess didn't expect that her lawless sister would suddenly take action when she was trying to make peace with the other party, sacrificing the red silk with the intention of hurting others. When she discovered it, she was about to stop it, but she felt the stone pavilion shake and her feet became empty. There was a scream in the pavilion. When the great goddess came to her senses, she found that everyone in the pavilion had fallen into the water, and the stone pavilion had turned into powder. Although the lake water is not deep, it is extremely cool. When you soak in your clothes, your body and bones will feel cold. She instinctively wanted to use magic to escape from the lake water, but only when she performed the magic did she realize that all the magic power around her body had been suppressed and restrained. Looking at the other fairies, they could no longer use their spells, with a look of panic on their faces. Of course, it was impossible for the pavilion to collapse and turn into ashes for no reason. The great goddess suddenly looked at the fairy in yellow by the lake, and saw that the woman sitting on the white jade chair casually withdrew her hands and was adjusting her sleeves one by one. The woman didn't say a word, but the fairy in white beside her looked at her sister with a cold look, and a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Little fairy, it's not a good habit to strike at every turn. In an instant, he can shake a stone pavilion made of immortal stones into dust, and he can easily suppress the magic power of more than a dozen people at the same time. This kind of strength is awe-inspiring." But the younger sister beside her seemed to have no idea about this kind of power to crush everyone, and she was still making angrily noises. "You dare to do this to me? Do you know who my father is? Just wait and let my father know." "Want?" The great goddess pinched her hand hard and said, "Shut up." But the other party had already heard the stupid remark. When Bo Rong heard the words of the little goddess in red clothes, she felt that she was so stupid that she was cute. She immediately lost the interest in arguing with her and just laughed. He is just the god of any mountain or river in the lower realm, right? What is it? When she looked up, she saw that Zhu Ti had turned around and left. Shui Yi turned around and called her again. "Rong Rong, are you still not leaving?" She quickly followed her and called her by the way. She still stood in the pool and watched the goddesses with interest. Shuang He, who was splashing in the lake, said, "Xiao Shuang, what are you doing standing there in a daze? Bring DG to follow you." In the lake, Bian Chun's great goddess held the hand of the little goddess tightly to prevent her from doing something even more inappropriate. When the female fairy in yellow and his entourage disappeared from the end of her sight, she turned her head and looked towards Yanlong, frowned, and combed her soaked long hair as she walked towards the lakeshore. "Fairy Yanlong." She called out to her. Yanlong turned back. "Fairy, do you know who that group of people is?" Yanlong shook his head in embarrassment. The great goddess looked sarcastic. "The fairy is in charge of this 1,000-flower ceremony, but no one knows how many fairies are attending the ceremony." Yanlong reluctantly replied, "There are many immortals attending this grand ceremony, tens of thousands of them. Is it strange that I don't recognize them?" The great goddess smiled faintly. "Didn't Fairy claim to have a close relationship with UNG Palace? This group of people must be closely related to UNG Palace. How could Fairy not recognize it?" Yanlong was speechless. The little goddess was still angry with herself and wanted to go ashore to argue with others, but she was restrained by the big goddess. "Don't you understand? This is someone we can't afford to offend. Don't cause any trouble for me." The little goddess said aggrievely, "Why am I the one who caused trouble for my sister? It's obviously them." The great goddess rubbed her forehead. "You are also spoiled." Without looking at her, she climbed out of the pool. At this time, she was finally able to perform the technique. She performed the technique and dried all the water stains. Fong turned back to look at the little goddess, frowning tightly. "Not yet." The goddesses went ashore one after another and left, and the lake returned to silence. Jiha, who had been pretending to be dead in the next pavilion, finally came to life, raised his hands and said, "It's really a good show." After a long time, it turns out that the little demon is not Lian Song's new love interest. Could it be that the black-robed fairy is the real one? A new beauty in UNG Palace. He analyzed with great interest. She has a gorgeous face and a fiery personality. I actually remembered that there were several beauties around Lian Song who were of this type. Maybe it's really her that Lian Songxin is attracted to. Ying Qianxia raised her finger and tapped the chessboard, indicating to Jiha to watch the game, and said lightly, "I don't think she is much better than that little demon. She is just vulgar." Jiha picked up a sunspot again and joked as he dropped it, "In your eyes, how many of the concubines and fairies in this world are not vulgar?" Ying Qianxia was noncommittal, glanced at Jiha, and changed the subject. "Compared with this, shouldn't you be more curious about the identity of that group of people?" Jiha smiled nonchalantly. "When the 1,000 flowers ceremony blooms, hundreds of thousands of gods and Buddhas in the 8 wastelands will attend. The female fairy in yellow is most likely the owner of one of the fairy mountains in the 8 wastelands." She shrugged. Showing his disinterest in this question, "How can we recognize all the hundreds of thousands of gods and Buddhas? How tiring would it be to be curious when a strange immortal appears?" Ying Qianxia was quiet for a moment, then dropped a white seed. "I just think she's a bit interesting." After a pause, "I don't know what she looks like, and she is no better than the black-robed female fairy." Jiha didn't take it seriously. "She has a light temperament, but a strong momentum. She is also called the Lord. If according to my estimation, she is the owner of some fairy mountain, she should be quite old." At this point, she came back to her senses and asked in surprise, "Do you suspect that Lian Song likes her?" Jiha immediately denied it. "That's impossible. You can sum up the women in Lian Song's past. None of them were older than him." Of. Ying Qianxia picked up a white seed and said, seemingly unintentionally, "Oh? So, you have summarized it? According to your summary, what kind of women does he always favor? Jiha said without hesitation. Of course, she is the one-in-a-million beauty. After answering this, Jia was stunned for a moment, put down the chess piece in his hand, and looked at Ying Qianxia with some suspicion. You are not feeling right today? Why are you always chatting? Lin Song. Ying Qianxia looked at her strangely. Isn't it weird to just chat casually when you encounter something about him? Jia thought the same, said nothing more, and returned to the chess game. On the way back to UNG Palace, Zongrong calculated all the way. As of today, several days have passed since the Emperor started to remove the power of the Western Emperor blade from her body. Oh, it's been 6 days. Zongrong felt that every time her family came back from Taichung Palace, her lord was very tired and seemed to be in a bad mood. The Emperor meant that this was normal. When he performed a spell on Zhu Ti, he needed to put the magic power into her body. A person would not feel very good if two forces that had nothing to do with her body were poured into her body, and these two forces used her body as a battlefield to fight. The Emperor asked Borong to imagine how it would feel if a naughty child from a relative's family ran wild on her territory, and she could only watch but not teach him a lesson. Zongrong thought about it for a moment and found that she could no longer be happy, so she felt that the Emperor was quite convincing. Today at the Thousand Flower ceremony, the Emperor said that as the deity of the Celestial clan, he was an indispensable mascot of the 9 heavens and had to attend. He asked her deity to rest for a day and go to Taichung Palace tomorrow. No one had any complaints about this arrangement, and Zongrong was even more happy. She had already planned to take Zidi to the Thousand Flowers ceremony to see the flowers and plants. Taking advantage of the fact that she did not have to go to Taichung Palace today, she encouraged everyone to go to Pumingxia Rock Garden. Who would have thought that they would meet Lian Song's confidant causing trouble by the Jiaoqing Lake? To be fair, Zongrong actually had a good impression of Lian Song. Perhaps more than 200,000 years ago, she was extremely jealous of this descendant god who had a destiny with Zhu Ti. But after Zhu Ti sacrificed, when she truly tasted what it felt like to lose, all those ridiculous jealousies were melted into the indescribable pain and passed away with the wind and with time. More than 200,000 years later, when she returned to this world, she heard from Xue about the dispute between Zudi and Lian Song that did not end well 30,000 years ago, and learned what Lian Song had done for Zudi. The last knot in my heart about him was also lifted. I just felt that God's will was like a knife and so ridiculous. Zhu Ti was suffering so much that even Song Jun was suffering as much. After coming to the 9 heavens, although she had also heard some rumors about His Highness Liansan of UNG Palace being romantically unlucky, as far as she had been recuperating in Shi Palace for the past few days, she had not seen any unidentified beauties in UNG Palace, so those rumors have always been very vague to her, with no real sense. Furthermore, she had met the 3rd Highness twice. One time was 6 days ago, when Lian Song was about to leave the Heavenly Palace and go to Huiyahai to collect the world's largest water in order to build a cauldron that could carry the power of the 5 natural gods. He came to Shi Hall to say goodbye to his ancestor Ti. The first time was yesterday. The busy 3rd Highness, who had just returned from Huiyahai for a few days, seemed to have something to do and needed to go to Beihai and came to Shi Palace to say goodbye to his ancestors again. In the 2 short meetings, the etiquette and demeanor of this young water god were very recognized by Zongrong. She felt that although he was a little younger, he seemed to be a good match for their family. However, after experiencing the experience in Jiaoqing Lake, Bian Rong's good impression of Lian Song suddenly fell to the bottom. Zhu Ti saw that Zongrong was unhappy and asked her after returning to Shi Hall. Bo Rong tried to hold back her complaints, but she couldn't hold them back in the end, so she let out an angry groan. Humph, these 3 highnesses are really romantic. Those nymphs and fairies are just trying to win over him and are jealous, but they actually act recklessly. It's simply unseemly to engage in such a big battle. Shuang He immediately laughed and exaggerated. Wow, Rongrong, after living and dying with you for so many years, this is the first time I heard the word proper from your mouth. It's really strange. Zongrong glared at Shuanghe. Shuanghe touched his nose and coughed lightly. Oh, they are indeed indecent. Xingrong immediately snorted again. The third prince actually likes them. Is there something wrong with his eyes? Zhu Ti sat down on a warm jade arhat bed and fiddled with the cushions behind her waist, trying to get more comfortable. After hearing the words, she thought thoughtfully. Although beauty is in the bones but not in the skin, the goddesses in the pavilion are all similar to each other. They are all top-notch. Kosaburo's vision is quite good. I don't think there is anything wrong with him. Zongrong was choked. She was speechless for a moment and then asked hesitantly, the third prince has really had so many romantic pasts. Don't you feel, Your Majesty? Shui glanced at her, and Zongrong immediately shut up. Zhu Ti finally fiddled with the cushions behind her. What should I feel? Am I surprised? Of course not. It's not the first time I know that Xiao Sanling is cynical and romantic. Seeing Bei Rong's complicated face, she suddenly laughed. Oh, it seems that you were deceived by the elegance and dignity he pretended to show when he came to see me twice. Zhu Ti's words were calm and gentle, but Zongrong didn't know whether to feel relieved or what to do. Although I heard Shui say it, both of them have forgotten their past relationship and are getting close to each other. Perhaps it is because of some strange combination of circumstances that they established the bone-eating mantra. But Bei Rong is very affectionate and has always judged things and people based on their emotions. She feels that the closeness between the two is not necessarily due to the bone-gnawing mantra. If that's the case, she can make it happen. However, she also had considerations in her mind and felt that Lian Song had to be perfect enough to be worthy of Zhu Ti. This was something she would be happy to accomplish. After inspecting Lian Song for the past few days, she had planned to fulfill their wishes. But today, by the Jiaoqing Lake, many of Lian Song's confidants gave her a blow in the head. Bei Rong knows very well what happens when a man and a woman fall in love. When she thought that those goddesses in the pavilion had been with Lian Song, and that Lian Song might have smiled at them, held their hands, hugged them, she felt angry. Saying those words to Zhu Ti was a sign of dissatisfaction with Lian Song, and it also reminded Zhu Ti, who might fall in love again, that this road of love has hidden dangers. Being interrupted by Shui, she couldn't say anything more. After thinking for a while, she said dully, I just think it would be better if he wasn't so romantic. Being romantic is a very bad thing because Yin Lin and Zhao Shi were not around, so Shui could only watch the mouths of Shuang and Tong Zongrong, the two ancestors. Shui was afraid that Zongrong would say something bad again, so she made tea and interrupted her. Three Highnesses, although the name of the flower is outside, but I heard that he has no close friendship with those goddesses. But he just appreciates their beautiful appearance. For example, our Lord also likes to collect flowers and plants. Seeing Zongrong's eyes widening suddenly, she said calmly, Oh, of course, Rongrong, you are different. Seeing that Bei Rong's eyes returned to their original size, she continued, Your Majesty has always only collected the most beautiful flowers and trees from all ethnic groups, and the flowers and trees are often confused by who you give them to. People are pruning their branches and leaves to make them look better, and they are jealous and noisy. Isn't the situation similar to what happened in the Celadon Lake today? Zhu Ti, who was sitting on the left side of the Arhat's bed, and Shuanghe, who was sitting on the right side of the bed, nodded frequently. Zhu Ti made a serious comment. I think they are arguing about who I treat better. It's also an expression of their cuteness. Zongrong felt very tired. She couldn't agree with this analogy, and she put her hands on her hips angrily. Well, many of our flowers and trees in Gugu Mountain have just awakened their wisdom and are ignorant. But the goddesses like Zhuzangshan, since how is it cute to be someone who knows etiquette and is jealous of a man all the time? As he said this, he slapped the table and became upset. I don't know what's going on with the gods, but what I've seen these days are all the fairies chasing after them. Running after male immortals and being so fascinated by male immortals, isn't there a female immortal who stands out from the crowd and can attract a group of male immortals to chase after her? Isn't it true that there are many beautiful fairies in the god clan? Zhu Ti silently leaned forward and lifted up a vase that had been knocked down by Bei Rong on the table in front of Arhat's bed. Shui is well informed and is the only person present who can answer the questions raised by Zongrong Sol. You don't know this. There's a beauty tree in Bohuang, Shui said slowly. The top one on the beauty tree is Bai Qian, the supreme immortal from Qingqiu Kingdom, but Bai Qian is the heavenly lord and is the Prince Yehua. No one dares to compete with the celestial clan for the appointed princess, so even if she is a stunning beauty, she will have few peach blossoms. Besides, Bai Mingju Xie Hualu, who ranks second on the beauty spectrum, looks like she has been there for thousands of years as soon as she wakes up. Gee, even when he is awake, he rarely goes out of the underworld, and there are naturally few peach blossoms. However, there is a Princess Shang Yun in the demon clan. I heard that her appearance is not much different from Bai Qian and Hualu. This princess is it's amazing. She may have more suitors behind her than the third prince's suitors, so she can be regarded as bringing glory to the women of Bohuang. Bo Rong said dryly, "Oh, that's okay. She played the role of a slut perfectly today." After a moment of silence, she became angry again, but in this generation, don't the fairies and demons have anything to do? They only know the truth all day long. Love, what words? Shui was silent for a moment. Most people still have serious things to do, such as Tianjun. I heard that he spent the whole night approving the papers yesterday, and he went to court on time today. Shuanghe frowned and raised his hand. This story seems not as good as the stories just now. Shui. After such a long debate, Zhu Ti was tired of listening. She closed her mouth and yawned, summing up the debate. Everyone cares about the personal affairs of their children, which means that the world is peaceful. Only when there are no major events in the world and life is worry-free can we have such leisure. I hope they always have this take your time. Okay, I'm tired. Let's go and rest for a while. You can continue. Then he went to the inner hall. She went away feeling relaxed. But the words left behind made the three of them feel heavy. They all thought of the catastrophe that was about to come. They were speechless for a moment and could no longer say anything. End of chapter 19, book 3.